welcome. We're very excited to be here with you today. I'm Marianne Babel, and today I'm joined by two members of the Rev team, Jonathan Spier, our CEO, and Jeff Ha, our go-to-market officer. And today they'll be showing you how to use our sales development platform to help you build better lists and optimize all of your outbound channels. But before I hand things off, let me set the stage a little bit. Prospecting is hard, building lists is hard, and sometimes it may even feel like thankless, time-consuming work. It's not uncommon for teams to feel confused about where to start. And it's not uncommon for them to start with just pulling the big brand names that we all recognize, whether or not they really fit their ICP. So once they've gone through that motion, like where do they go next? Sometimes it's left to guesswork, and maybe they add names and targets of companies that fit a few firmographics. But there's a better way, and we're going to show you that today. So Jonathan, with that in mind, over to you, and I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Marianne. Glad to be here. Welcome, everybody. And as Marianne said, let's get right into it and talk about how to build better target lists and find targets that act like your best customers. First, I'll do the very brief commercial on Rev. We are fortunate to be working with some of the absolute best sales and marketing, B2B sales and marketing leading organizations. Our customers are folks like Zendesk, NetSuite, Oracle, Splunk, and others. And they come to us because companies need pipeline, like we all need air to breathe. And we know that as B2B sellers and marketers. We spend so much time trying to create pipeline. But it's not enough to create more pipeline. We also need to be creating better pipeline. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how to create better pipeline with targeting. The challenge, fundamentally, of doing that is one that we call the first mile problem of B2B. What that means is that no matter what effort you take, no matter how good your SDRs are, no matter how talented your sales execs, no matter how thoughtful your marketing programs, all that effort that happens later in the funnel is wasted if you're talking to the wrong prospects to begin with. That's the first mile problem. If you engage the wrong prospects, every further step that follows is wasted. And we see it all the time in business. I'm sure everyone on this webinar has seen the same thing, that too often, great opportunities, the 5-star opportunities we call them, are missed. They never enter your funnel because they buy from a competitor that maybe never heard of you, or they never engaged with you to begin with. Or, super frustrating, low fit leads. Companies that look nothing like your ICP enter the funnel. And that happens all the time because we feel that pressure. We need to build pipeline. But without a real keen view of who the right prospects are, those are the opportunities that end up sitting there. They waste time. They're on the report every week in your pipeline, but they're not going to close because they really don't look anything like your best customers. And finally, we see all the time that trying to tell the difference between who's a great prospect and who's not a great prospect. Well, every function that's doing outbound marketing, sales, the sales development, wastes time and struggles with that frustrating and inconsistent research trying to figure it out. Now, at Rev, we decided to take on that challenge and try to fix the first mile problem of B2B with better targeting. And if you really look at it and you think about the sales funnel overall, in 25 years, we've had tremendous innovation and great new tools and new process at every step of the sales funnel. We're so much better now at managing deals in process than we ever were before with CRM systems. And the mid funnel with our ABM systems and marketing automation do such a great job of capturing and nurturing leads. We're better at doing outreach at the SEM level, the sales engagement level. And we're even better at managing deals after they close with the customer success systems like Gainsight. But the problem we're talking about, the first mile problem, It happens before all that. It happens in this area we call above the funnel. And that's the area Rev is addressing with what we call our sales development platform. And if you look at it, fundamentally, the challenge is that we've always thought about the buyer journey as starting with awareness and then intent, evaluation, purchase, and advocacy. That's the buyer, process, the buyer engagement during the funnel. But what's been missing to solve the first mile is this concept of fit and readiness. It's being able to be much more consistent, much more efficient, faster, more disciplined, better at identifying, does a prospect look like my AICP? Does it fit? And are they possibly ready to buy now? And that's the pace we think really needs to be addressed to solve that first mile problem. In just a minute, I'm going to hand it off to Jeff to share a demo of what we're talking about. But let me share briefly first what it actually is that we do to find AICP or ICP fit and readiness in this area we call above the funnel. And it starts with targeting in a different and more sophisticated way. What Rev is bringing to market is the use of AI, artificial intelligence, to identify the attributes of your best prospects and model those using something we call an AI customer profile, or AICPs for short. And AICPs are designed to find new targets in your existing markets or in entirely new markets that can be, even in your existing markets, 50 to 80% net new. Folks you didn't even know about that are in the market that could be a great fit for your AICP, or for your ICP rather, and should be targeted. Second, what we do is help turn that targeting into target account lists at the personal level or the function level for every function or individual rep who needs it. That means a specific and up-to-date prioritized TAL for every single rep when they do their outbound to know exactly who they should call without wasting time on all that manual effort, the hunting around and the guessing about who to go to next. And finally, we're a system that fits and extends current process. A lot of folks interact with us directly through their Salesforce system or through outreach because we all have systems in place already, and our job is to feed those systems, not create an entirely new system for everyone to learn. Now, again, I'm going to turn it to Jeff in just a minute to share a demo of what we're talking about. But there's one more thing I need to share first, which is, these days everyone says AI, and what does that really mean, AI? It really begs a more specific description. And so I'd like to introduce just briefly a concept we call exographics. And historically, the challenge is that if you're going into the outside world, if you're really engaged in an outbound prospecting process, the only tools we've had to use historically have been databases that understand firmographic information. That is the basic information on how big is a company, what industry is it, how many employees does it have. And the problem is that there's too many companies, like in this case, Caterpillar and John Deere, that are firmographically identical. They're both Fortune 100. They're both the industrial machinery market or industry. And they both have roughly the same number of employees. So with just firmographics, there isn't any way to distinguish between whether one of these is a much better prospect for you than the other. At Rev, when we talk about AI, we're really talking about exographics, which is a more detailed view of how a company actually executes its mission. So for example, exographics include things like whether a company is an early adopter or a late adopter of new technology. And it turns out that Cat tends to be an early adopter and Deere tends to be later. Cat tends to use the cloud, Deere less so. And Deere tends to have a higher focus on B2C, where Cat is a relatively low focus on B2C. Now, Which one as a sales team should you call on? Well, that depends on what you're selling. If it's a cutting edge cloud, crypto, who knows, maybe Cat's a better prospect. We've also talked to a lot of companies that are in, older type technologies like fax replacement. Maybe Deer would be a better prospect. The point is that at Rev, we have a library of over 500 of these different exographics. And using this level of insight into companies gives an entirely new way to evaluate which companies could be a great prospect and which ones not. In other words, which ones fit your ICP and which ones don't, so you can find the right prospects, solve the first mile problem in B2B, and find better prospects and build better pipeline. So that's my intro, and as promised now, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Ha, my partner in crime for go-to-market, to go ahead and share what we do. Jeff?
All right, thank you, Jonathan, and welcome everyone. It's nice to meet you. Let me go ahead and take over the screen share and show you, I'll walk you through a demo of the SDP, the Sales Development Platform, and kind of take you through the important steps. Obviously, we can spend a ton of time kind of diving into lots of details. What I'd love to accomplish today is really give you a sense of kind of how this all works, right? Get you comfortable with the major steps that we take here. I'll treat this a little bit like a cooking show here because I like to watch cooking shows, and kind of, if you think about a cooking show, what they like to show you first is the end product, right? And with anything that we do here with regards to coming up with a better list, the end goal is to understand and organize the universe in a way that's going to make you much more efficient and to give you the best target account list, right? That is what we're trying to achieve here at Rev. So I'm going to first show you this, and then we'll kind of take a few steps back and show you how we get here, right? We'll show you the ingredients and we'll show you the steps to get here. But this is what we call our bullseye chart. And in this particular example here, I'm gonna go through a fun example of just looking at the Fortune 100 companies as a basis for how we look at the world, and we'll kind of examine how we get to this step. What I'm showing you here is the output of this AICP based on the Fortune 100 companies, and it's showing me how we can now organize the universe in a very interesting way, again, to develop that target account list that's now highly prioritized. In this example here, you can see that there's different colored dots that represent different things. So I'll go ahead and kind of walk you through how we get here, right? So we start with a seed list, right? In this particular case, this seed list is the Fortune 100 companies that have been listed for 2022. With this seed list, our AI is able to understand, to Jonathan's point, all the underlying exographics that make these companies not only look alike, but act alike. And with this basis, our goal is to get you to this, what we call this bullseye set of companies, these companies that are highly or prioritized and ranked according to the mathematical model that our SDP was able to build based off of this particular seed list. Now, why is this important? Well, if you look at it, you can imagine there's this whole universe of companies out there that exist, right? And oftentimes when we examine companies, that bring us their ABM list and such, for example, if I turn on this comparison, this is an example of what it typically looks like when a company brings us their ABM list. Sure, there's a concentration of companies in the middle, to Jonathan's point. Companies can typically identify a good number of target accounts. But oftentimes you can see these red dots also kind of proliferate throughout the rings here, which means that they're not as a good fit. So that ends up being in your pipeline, and it stays in your pipeline for months, maybe even for years, right? Sometimes we ask people how long, when they bring us their ABM list, we ask them, how old is this list? And they're like, maybe a year old, 3 years old, right? So our whole goal is to figure out how to organize this, how to prioritize this list, and ultimately we're going to talk about how your teams can effectively use different parts of this list, right, in your workflow. So that's our end goal. So now let's take a few steps back and talk about the ingredients that go into understanding this, this universe here that we just talked about. So like I mentioned, it starts with an AICP, right? And you hear this term, we talked about it a few times. It stands for AI customer profile. Again, when we think about a customer profile, usually it's a much more static definition, right? You know, I used to manage a sales team. We used to probably refresh our ICP maybe once a year. Oftentimes it might go a little bit longer than that. But once a year, we would say, hey, you know, here's a PowerPoint slide that we present to the sales team and marketing team and say, here's the characteristics of what we think our ideal customer profile looks like, right? Everything from headcount to revenue to vertical, maybe some other things. But that's typically the extent of a customer profile. What we've done here at Rev is to take AI and build a profile that's much more complete than what we've been ever able to build, right? Using just firmographic data, right? This is, again, we'll go to exographics in a minute, but that's the whole point. It's let's use a great starting point, right? A complete picture of what your ideal customer profile looks like, an AICP. That's going to be our starting point. So in this particular example, like I mentioned, we're going to use the Fortune 100, and it starts with a seed list, right? So a seed list is simply a CSV file that we would then import into our system, and it's just a single column of websites that you consider your best customers, right? So this might be your actual best customers that are currently in your CRM. We can pull data from there. Or if you're just getting started into a new target market, oftentimes we create this seed list using hypotheticals, right? Who do you think you want to be, or customers you want in this particular target segment? And then that's what we're going to use to train our AI on. So in this example here, like I mentioned, if you're familiar with the Fortune 100 list, it's names that Walmart, Amazon, Google, Apple, all that kind of stuff, right? I only show this to you because, again, we could probably spend a whole hour talking about seed list definition and such. And this is really important, right? Because your seed list is your ingredients, right? Just like again, a cooking show, the ingredients that you put into the SDP is going to determine how the outcome is, right? So in this particular seed list, I just wanted to point out that there's a mixture of different kinds of companies and different industries and all that kind of stuff. Part of the process in working with Rev is that we go through this examination of this seed list with you, right? This is a best practice that our customer success team brings to the table when we interact with you, right? To craft this particular seed list. Because like I mentioned, this is really important. It's going to determine your total addressable market, but it's also going to determine the model that we're going to use to identify and prioritize your target account list. So if this seed list isn't right, or if it's can be tuned, then we definitely want to do that, right, as part of our process. But again, for the sake of this particular demo, we're just going to use this seed list as is and plug that into the SDP there. All right. So let's go back to the SDP, and like I mentioned, to create an AICP, super simple here, right? We give it a name. Like I mentioned, we drag a CSV file with your seed list, which is a column of company websites. We also have the ability to add a comparison list. So oftentimes the use case here is a company's ABM list, right? Whether it's a few hundred companies that they've already have in their CRM to a few thousand companies, right? We can add that into our analysis here to let you know of your ABM list, how those target accounts prioritized against your seed list here. And then obviously we can also do a suppression file, right? Which oftentimes companies either already have an existing customer base, or they already know that these particular companies are not a fit. Then we can definitely suppress those particular companies as well. And that's it, right? It's as simple as that. When you have those inputs, again, we only need the seed list as the starting point. But if you have these other files, we can certainly take that. You also see familiarity with some firmographic filters that we have available to you because folks are used to this. And in some cases, it might make sense to add some of these filters early in the process. We typically like to save this for later on in the process because, again, we want the AI to do all the heavy lifting for us, right? We want the AI to identify the universe of target accounts that are relevant rather than immediately excluding these types of things. But, if for sure that, hey, our product, if a company doesn't have X number of employees, they're not going to be relevant, then sure, right? These filters can be placed right away. Okay. So that's kind of the starting point in terms of building an AICP. So once you do that, our system will take that seed list and it'll build a model, right? And the model, like I said, is built off of these exographics that Jonathan mentioned early on in the conversation. These exographics is really the star of the show, right? It is the unique differentiator that Rev brings to the table. It's a capability that we've developed with an internal data sciences team for the past almost decade, right? Looking at this problem of above the funnel and trying to understand what's important to understand about companies. What characteristics do we want to be able to identify beyond just what I'll call the superficial firmographic type things that lots of databases use? It's looking under the hood and understanding ultimately things like the people involved in the company, the decisions that they make with regards to their hiring, the ratios of different organizations within that company. All of those things are what we call heavyweight decisions that companies make. And those decisions determine how a company ultimately operates, right? And that's our definition of exographics, right? Understanding how companies operate and using that understanding to identify, again, look-alike companies, but also act-alike companies, right? Which is, again, really important to what we're trying to achieve here. So for this particular AICP, we're seeing a set of exographics that pop up, and we're measuring a lot of these different signals, right? Data risk, IT workforce, sales workforce, tech centricity. Again, we could probably spend another hour going into the details of exographics and how they work and how they're calculated and all that stuff. What's important for this particular demonstration is understanding that the combination of all these exographics is what develops the mathematical model that we use to identify, again, when we go back to our bullseye chart, how companies fall within this universe. And ultimately, we're able to prioritize what these green dots here, which are what we're saying are the best lookalike companies, the best target accounts that your team should be focusing on, right? That's the goal we want to get to. And that's achieved through these exographic lenses here. We also do an analysis of firmographics because people still want this information. We get it, right? So we're able to kind of show you of the universe of target accounts that came back, where do they fall with regards to these very common firmographics like headcount and industry footprint, right? And ultimately, the end game is this list, right? Is the target accounts that we're able to come through with our analysis here, right? So as you can see, there's, within minutes, right, of running this report, we get an initial set of over 10,000 target accounts prioritized, right, based on the mathematical model that we were able to build from your particular seed list. And you can see the prioritization here of the star rating, the headcounts here, the website, the industry footprint, so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to save the conversation a little bit on what we do next from here. But just to summarize, those are the steps that one takes, right? It starts with the seed list. Then we look at the exographics to build the model. And ultimately, we're able to organize now the target accounts into a prioritized list for you, right? So those are the steps that going through this. So obviously, like I said, this is just a fun example for the Fortune 100. I think would be good to show you is how we use at Rev, right? Because this is now us using our own technology to build our own pipeline, right? And hopefully it will give you some ideas on how different organizations or different functions within your company can take advantage of STP, right? So you can imagine for our sales force, we have a hyper focus on technology SaaS companies, right? So we have an AICP that's built specifically around SaaS technology companies. We obviously have a marketing function, and they're trying to drum up awareness and all that kind of stuff. So we have an AICP that's based around conference registrants. So we hold webinars from time to time, and we always want to build awareness, not only within the folks that attend our current webinar like today, but how do we use that information to identify lookalike companies of the people that attend today's webinar for our next webinar, right? So let it build on itself. How do we use that? So that's an AICP built for that. And we also have a biz dev function where we partner with a lot of agencies in our ecosystem. So we have an AICP for that, right? Every one of these functions ultimately needs some sort of list to interact with whatever system that they're used, right? Our sales team uses Salesforce. They need lists of target accounts. They call it strategic accounts, right? It's a list of companies, right? Prioritized so that they know what to do there. Our marketing needs a list of contacts to go into their engagement platform. They need an AICP, right? Same thing with our biz dev. So these are just different examples of how functions create AICPs for their purpose, right? So let's drill into one that's relevant for our sales team, which is this tech SaaS AICP, right? So again, to walk you through what you're seeing here, right? We started with a seed list, right? And you can see for us, our seed list has some dispersion in it. This is not uncommon, right? Lots of companies who come with a seed list, there is this dispersion that happens. And the reason being is because you can imagine, when you're early in your market and your first set of customers, they're not all going to be exactly the same kinds of customers, right? But that's okay. Our model can take that in and understand the commonalities, even if you have this type of dispersion here. With that model, we're able to now build this lookalike set of companies. These are the best ranking prioritized target accounts that we can get based on the seed list that was provided. And just for fun, we actually did an exercise where we built a list not using AI. We built a list using firmographics and whatever characteristics that we did just to compare how it looks against the AI. So this is this comparison list. And you can see just the difference across the two lists, right? The AI related prioritized target account list versus call it our ABM list. You can see that the dispersion is just a lot greater. And again, this is very common, right? With our customers, when they bring us their ABM list, there's a lot of dispersion that happens. And the reason being is because, again, as humans, as people, we can only perceive so many sets of signals that we can see that are in common across this data set of companies. AI is built to do this job in spades, right? They can look at millions of signals and understand these combinations and stuff that we just can't do as humans. And that's why the concentration is a lot better, right? It's because it can take into account just lots more data points. But this is, again, a very common view when we look at that. And then finally, like I said, there's now the universe of companies that exist out there outside of your bullseye. Are these companies non-factors? Absolutely not. They still are relevant, right? So let's talk to this next step of what do I do now, right? Great, Rev, you've kind of analyzed our seed list. You've given me, a list of target accounts. What do companies do with this? Right? What's the next step in this workflow that you provided for us? And the answer is it depends on the company. So I'll give you a few different examples of how a few different of our customers interact with this data, just to give you a sense of what's possible within your organization, right? Depending on the size and the complexity of your different functions. So obviously the green dots, this bullseye. So let me go and turn off a few of these things here just to clear up the picture. This bullseye list of target accounts, these are your best target accounts determined by our AI ranking. So oftentimes what this means is this is the focus of an organization's sales and ABM efforts, right? And they usually blitz this particular account list. And what I mean by blitz is every function plays a role in making sure that these accounts are taken care of, right? So for example, these target accounts in this bullseye area is now the new ABM list for that organization, right? And with that, what they're doing is now doing nurturing, content syndication. They want to make sure that they build awareness within this target account list, right? And then after a certain point of time, sales would come in and now follow up, right, with their own outreach process, right? So this is what we mean by a blitz approach, is that every organization is touching these accounts in their own way, right? That's a very common practice and workflow that happens with this inner circle there. Okay, what's next? Well, you can see that there's a lot of other companies that maybe don't reside within the bullseye, but are still ranked fairly well, right? In these particular companies, and call it these outer concentric rings, oftentimes, because the volume is higher, because you have a higher number of companies, and the fact that they're scoring less, oftentimes this goes more into a nurturing campaign where typically only marketing will touch them for a while, right? They run a 3-month campaign, a 6-month campaign, they get the ball rolling, and ultimately, hopefully, some of these guys will now move in based on their lead score and their interactions with your different campaigns and become a highly relevant target account. But you don't want your most expensive assets and resources, which is typically your sales team and people power, working on these companies outside of the bullseye, because again, they haven't shown the fit and readiness to engage and become your next best customer, right? So that's more of a divide and conquer approach, where now as you move away from the bullseye, you now want to organize your campaigns for higher volume, but less, call it people power, right? As you move away from there. So that's just 2 examples of kind of interactions that we've seen quite common when it comes to what to do next with this data. To Jonathan's point early on in the presentation, all of this can be sucked into your system, right? And that's our goal, right? Is we want to make sure that we do the analysis, the model building, the prioritization, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure you work in your environment. So all of these different target accounts that come out of this AICP, they can be sucked into, oftentimes it's Salesforce, right? Is the kind of a CRM of record for many of the customers that we work with. And from Salesforce, folks then route things to like Outreach or Marketo or HubSpot or whatever kind of other systems that you might be using. We can also do any number of types of integrations where you can route it directly to those other systems as well, right? That's a big deal for us, again, to make sure that you're working in the environment that you're comfortable in, right? Our goal is to make sure that the list that goes into each of those systems is the best quality list as your starting point, right? And that's, again, we talk about the first mile problem. This is ultimately the problem we want to solve here. Okay. So let me see if there's any other interesting thing. I think that's pretty much it for this particular version of the demo. Like I mentioned, we can go into deep around seed lists and exographics and all that kind of stuff, but we'll maybe save that for future webinars. All right.
Thank you, Jeff and Jonathan. We've had a few questions come in and we have some time. So are you open to answering some?
As long as they're not hard.
Let's give it a go. So the
All
first
right.
question I have for you is, we use intent data. How is this different? Wondering if or how this fits into our intent strategy.
Yeah, I can take that one. It's a great question. I mean, first of all, intent is a hot topic in the market these days, and we're big fans of what the intent providers have done. We look at intent as sort of an equal but different type of technology, because where intent really shines is lower on in the funnel. When a company is hitting your site and they're consistently engaging and they're shopping maybe on third-party sites, all those things, they're generating that intent signal. That's great, and you want to know about it, especially your inbound prospecting function. So your inbound SDRs or whoever's handling your inbound traffic really wants to know about that signal, and it's really valuable, and we're big fans of that. And all of our customers, or most of our customers, tend to use those kinds of systems. But for the outbound motion, we're really talking about before a company has ever shown intent in the first place. Maybe they aren't aware of you. They haven't shown intent yet, but they could because they fit your AICP. Maybe they're even ready to hear from you. But at that point, when you're doing outbound research, you need a different kind of signal. And we think that's what exographics provides with AICP, behind it to show you who are those companies, that are a fit, that complements that intent signal. So one way to think about it is intent, lower in the funnel, really great for inbound. What we do in exographics for earlier in the funnel and really great for outbound. But a final point is they work really well together because where we can help identify accounts that ought to be pursued with an outbound strategy, those same accounts later on will start showing intent when you grab onto them again in a different way. And vice versa, because when accounts show intent, it doesn't always mean they're a great fit for your ICP. So taking your intent list and feeding it in like Jeff has done with these red dots, the comparison list, is a great way to evaluate also your intent signal, where the two technologies, intent plus exographics, really work well together. And then to add, Jeff?
No, that's exactly right. To Jonathan's point, a lot of companies use intent and they work very well together. And I've even seen some sophistication where companies will use the Rev star rating along with the intent score and come up with a brand new score, a complementary score that incorporates both as a way to manage their lead scoring, right, overall. And that's great as well, right? So we're seeing technologies work well together.
Wonderful. Next question. We're in a niche market. How custom can this get?
Right. That's a great question. It's something we didn't really touch on. I think when I mentioned exographics first, what I talked about is our library of 500 exographics that we, as Jeff mentioned, over almost a decade now have commercialized. But another element of our system is custom exographics, or we call them custom exographic lenses. So you'll catch us using either term. But the system is designed to let our customers, really, with our support, but also, truly custom, identify signals and characteristics they care about that maybe we haven't prioritized, that isn't in our system yet, or maybe never will be because it's specific to a market like you're talking about, Mariangel, a niche market. And in those cases, you can just build a custom exographic lens that leverages the same power of the AI and the same data sources we draw from, which is the entire public web. It's all people information from LinkedIn and proprietary information from Dun & Bradstreet that we license, and search across all those to develop very, very custom type targeting. So the short answer is it can get extremely custom. And I should have some examples, but I don't want to share examples that are things we've actually done. Jeff, do you have any examples that are very genericized and private?
I mean, some examples could be specific things. Like we had an example where one of the requirements was that a prospect needed to have more than one location, right, for it to be a fit for their AICP. So you can imagine we had to do an analysis to look into kind of different locations and making an account of that particular such, right? So that's the kind of level that we can get to when we think about custom lenses.
Great. These are great questions. If anyone else is on here has questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat and we'll get to a few more. All right, here's the next one. How do companies typically use this information across different functions?
Okay, I'll take this one here. Yeah, so hopefully we spoke to a little bit of it earlier, and it's like examples I shared with regards to using this information is every function needs a list of some nature, right? And typically the difference between the list is really around the size of the list and the kind of prioritization of that list, right? Those are kind of, I would say, the two dimensions that when you look at different functions, what they care about, right? So on the sales side, you can imagine the size of the list needs to be smaller, right? Because they don't have, or their whole focus is to try to close deals. So they want the best target account list possible. And usually with sales organizations, they could range between a few hundred lists per rep, per territory, something in that range. So they would look at the SDP and say, okay, give me the best of the best, right? Which is the bullseye, right? It's the green dots that you still see in front of you here. And that's the list that the sales organization would use. Marketing, on the other hand, they have engagement platforms. They use a Canon to kind of do their work, right? So they're able to take a much higher volume with the understanding that their engagement rate is going to be typically lower. And that's why they need a higher volume, right? Because it's a numbers game, a different kind of numbers game for marketing. So for marketing, they'll look at a target account list that might be outside that bullseye, right? Maybe the next concentric circle and say, I want to take that next tier and I'm going to put that into my nurturing campaigns or my awareness campaigns or my display campaigns to do that. It's a heck of a lot better than just randomly finding companies and putting into those campaigns, right? Because again, you are still prioritizing based on the scoring that's coming out of it, right? So hopefully that gives you a few examples of kind of how different functions use it. It's all based on prioritization and size of list is often the cutoffs for each of the different functions there.
Great. We have one more still in the queue. This one is a really great question. We haven't answered it so far. So with Rev, how often would I need to refresh my list?
Got it. Okay. So I'll kind of talk about it from a refresh of a seat list standpoint, and then also from a target account list, because I think those both come into play when you think about your go-to-market and making sure that that's up to date. So from a seat list standpoint, you can imagine that, again, depending on the velocity of your sales cycle and such, for some organizations that we work with, their sales cycle is maybe 1 month. So you can imagine after 6 months, you have a whole new set of brand new customers that are now in your company, right? New logos that you just picked up. For me, I want to make sure that my target account list is up to date often, which means that as I acquire new customers, I want to be able to refresh the seed list and run this analysis and get my prioritization at least on a quarterly basis, maybe even on a monthly basis, again, depending on how fast you can do this. I think this is a capability that organizations haven't had, right? So this is a new, I guess, new workflow and a new way of thinking that we're also introducing into the market. Like I mentioned in my prior experiences, we would update our ICP, essentially our seat list, once a year. That's about all the time we had to do it because this is an extensive process to kind of go through that exercise. But now with technology and AI, we hope that companies will do it on a much more regular basis, right? Quarterly, monthly, like I mentioned, because things just change so fast. A company that was maybe ranked number 100 on your list 3 months ago might now be number 1 on your list because of things that have happened, right? Exographics changed. The kinds of companies that you're closing has changed. So for me, I would say, a much more frequent behavior is now possible with the refresh.
I think this also, just to add a point, I think this also lets, the targeting team, if you think about whether it's the strategy team or a business owner or a RevOps team, it allows them to use their creativity. If a lot less time is going into just research and guesswork about who should we talk to, then it allows you to put that time into creatively coming up with a new sub-target. Because where the ICP might tell you the entire universe to go after, you might then have an idea for a campaign for how to really reach or engage some of those folks, where you create a second lens, find people with just a certain attribute and go at them with a much more specific or targeted message. So we see a lot of that where it elevates the function and makes your SDR function, for example, or any of your go-to-market people a strategic weapon for the company, because they can be more creative about opening the door as opposed to spending so much time just doing that work of figuring out who to talk to in the first place.
Yeah. And one final thing I would say is just, it also, when you think about a go-to-market, oftentimes companies wait too long to pull the plug, right? Not every go-to-market idea is going to work. Not every market that you decide that you want to go into is going to be viable for you, right? And our hope here is that with this process and the speed and efficiency, that a company can decide to test the market, and 6 weeks later, they will have enough data and confidence to say, you know what, this wasn't the best idea. And that's okay, right? We've only spent 6 weeks trying to evaluate this market versus a lot of companies, they spend 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And then at that point in time, they're just overly committed to that particular market. And they're afraid to pull the plug because of the amount of effort and kind of time that went into trying to open up that market, right? So I think there's a new set of capabilities, a new way of thinking about go-to-market that hopefully SDP and Rev is going to introduce into the company's kind of strategic planning moving forward.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those questions being submitted. I think they really helped enhance the demo today and all the things that you've shared. So thank you for answering them. If there's no other questions, we'll wrap up. What I'd love to do is to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. We will be sharing it out with you. But we'd love to stay in touch. If you're interested in learning more about Rev or scheduling a one-on-one demo, reach out to us. You can find us at getrev.ai. And we're also on social media. So find us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we'll continue the conversations there and continue to share with you some of the cool findings that we're discovering along the way in this journey with some of our other customers. So thank you so much, and we hope to catch you all soon.
Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.